Welcome again. This is going to be the analytical episode. We'll be diving a bit deeper into this really weird novel, The Obscene Bird of Night by José Donoso. The title alone probably inspires some curiosity, and it should. While you won't be able to resolve all of your questions in this sitting, you will find some ideas that help you latch on to the text. Of course, if you're here just to listen to the themes of the book, that's great as well. I think that you'll probably get a lot from this sitting. I'll try to make sure that I provide enough details that readers who are new to this title may follow as well. As I work through this analysis, I recommend following two main words: mirror and mimetic. They seem to be key concepts in reading this book. Conventional thinking tells us that literature is a mirror, that it reflects an image or representation of its subject, like society, back to itself. This is one process we think through which reading helps us better know ourselves and our society. Generally, when people take an introduction to literature class, for example, the mirror is a great tool to begin thinking about reading novels. We start out by learning how a metaphor, again, for example, can be a representation for a symbol or something else, and that ultimately literature is a mirror that can reflect back to us a central truth, a perspective of society, or a high minded image of ourselves. The word that I'm thinking about with Donoso's work is mimesis, which means imitation in the Greek. It refers to this way of representational thinking that we've gotten used to with literature. One of the classic tomes of literary criticism by Eric Auerbach called this the mimetic tradition, and has been a cornerstone for how we've read literature for centuries, way back to the Greeks. To be clear, I'm not saying that this is an incorrect way of looking at literature. Rather, this is a traditional perspective that still impacts our framing of literature today. But there are other paths of seeing. A major purpose for reading is to take another step or steps beyond a first surface reflection and begin to develop the abilities for more complex insights. That is, in fact, why we study literature. That is, we read and discuss as a process of reorienting and re envisioning a subject because things simply look different when you are positioned at another angle, or at this angle, or at this angle. In The Obscene Bird of Night, Jose Donoso creates a narrative that is well beyond the initial idea that literature is a mirror. The book is what some scholars have called anti-mimetic, or to put it another way, anti-representational. How does that work, you might ask? Let's take a look. Donoso crafts a complex lens through which his novel is not simply a reflection of life, but it's all at once a distortion, an exaggeration, a corruption, a disfigurement of life, or perhaps of reality, or of the creative process. He accomplishes this feat through narrative exaggeration, shifts in time and place, as well as through what writer Rodica Grigore calls, and I like this, the tension of paradox. Let's also keep that word paradox in mind as we move forward. The novel shows what happens when our ability to see and understand reality is not just a simple reflection, but it's shaped or even perverted by the subjects themselves and the mediums through which we see. And that includes our own minds. In an early passage, Bedito describes a resident of the infamous Casa. Remember, La Casa from the review is the place where Umberto escapes and he finds the nun, the old ladies, and an orphanage inside this kind of decaying complex. In a discussion with the old women, he describes Don Clemente de Acosta's ghost, who, the old women say, haunts La Casa. It's through the depiction of Don Clemente's insanity, as well as the metaphor of the tall tale, that Donoso introduces some early distortions. In this passage, he writes, Don Clemente, who gods condemned to wander naked through the casa to punish him for scandalizing them with the exhibition of his privates, and that God will forgive the old cleric only when so many of the women have said so many rosaries that he, in his mercy, will consent to give him back his clothing one piece at a time, so that he may enter the kingdom of heaven with his clothes on. In the meantime, he has to go wandering through the casa to remind the old women to pray for him and make God give him back his shoes, cassock, underpants. Yes, his underpants are the most urgent. They say Don Clemente hasn't appeared without his socks or undershirt for some time now. That's something, at least. It stands to reason, then, that his underpants are the next thing God will give him back. Let them be long underwear, the old women pray, and made of flannel for winter. The hum of their rosaries at dusk fills the casa like the buzzing of insects busy spinning cloth for those underpants. When Don Clemente, naked, pounces on some old woman at dusk while she's thinking, his thoughts are elsewhere. Aside from showing us occasional humor in Donoso's book, the passage initiates readers into several shades of reality and exaggeration. One reality is the mention of the former pastor's ghostly or semi present state. Another layer is the women's farcical piety and outrage at the sight of Don Clemente's nudity, which also seems to have drummed up the haunting in the first place. Finally, the repetition of they say in reference to the old women's story intimates that their propensity to further exaggerate the story's excitement. By placing this passage early on, Donoso prepares readers for later passages in which these sorts of narrative techniques veer extremely into distortion. Just as Medito indicates that the women's story shapes their version of reality, the other distortions, like an unreliable narrator, various masks, and physical differences, deform both voice and voices through which we, the readers, see the story. For the author's audience, this sort of decay of meaning is expressed through narrative shifts that frustrate reading and literacy. We see, for example, that the novel undercuts the identity of the speaker to decontextualize the narrative voice, or that time and perspective shifts within the course of a sentence to undermine a feeling of setting. Large portions of the book's narrative are ambiguous. One of the more significant performances of this ambiguity is the mix and conflation of characters like Inez and Iris Mataluna. In fact, early on, I had to retrack the story several times because I'd mixed up their names. I hadn't realized that Inez and Iris were, in fact, separate names and they were separate characters. The spelling was just so close together. Both women are involved in sexual encounters, and they're both disturbing. They both are objects of men's desires, and they both give birth to babies who are named the boy. Several incidents occur at different times, but the novel's juxtaposition of the two women's narratives suggests they either happen concurrently or at different times. Yes, I know that this is confusing, but it's part of the novel's narrative ambiguity. Events simply may or may not be happening. As Donoso describes them, however, the women's realities are inverse of the others. Iris Montaluna's reality is youthful, naive, and darker. Inez is not quite saintly, but her upbringing and piety afford her a certain amount of reverence, experience, and privilege that's contrasted with her opposite pair. Even from the outset, though, the mirror is imperfect. The narrative moves us back and forth in place and time between the two in ways that encourage their conflation. While they are inverses of one another, the pairing reveals that they are also part of a paradoxical whole. One side, in fact, needs the other to define the other, and it doesn't quite work at times. Secondly, Umberto and Medito may be the same person, but parts of the novel are presented as either fever dreams or as images in Umberto's authorly creation. Thus, the novel may heavily imply that one character, either Umberto or Medito, is a manifestation of the other's psyche. When Umberto slash Medito is sewn up as an embunche, is it Umberto or Medito who gets closed up? Or are both characters sealed up in the same skin? I still don't know. Then, of course, the fact that he is sealed up now makes me think that Umberto slash Medito may be an inverse of Inez slash Iris, who are actually the story's real creators. Yep, what a wonderfully paradoxical narrative. And don't forget, there are through lines through this, just as long as you don't try to force the novel into a linear chronology. The point is this: real identities are never quite settled, and Donoso loves to destabilize the concept of truth and reality. But it happens for a purpose. He shows that representation and reflection weaken meaning. The fact that Donoso was able to keep all of these mental gymnastics together is a tribute to his achievement. The characters' contradictions, and indeed the book's own ambiguity, destroys readers' attempts to settle its meaning. Through the process of engaging the tensions of these paradoxes, he de emphasizes a mimetic or mirror tactic and asks readers more so to think about the disorienting effect and its churn of images. This difficult, grotesque, and important novel is well beyond the reach of a single linear and first level interpretation. It requires several giant steps past a mirror on life. And it emphasizes the process of reading fiction for its anti-mimetic qualities rather than its ability to simply reflect life. Thus, and if you get nothing else from this video, you can get this. The author seems to show that the mirror is an imperfect metaphor for reading. Thank you for listening. This is a difficult book, but I know you are up for the challenge. If this is a book you are thinking about picking up, be patient with yourself. It's not a novel that people typically get. So take your time and allow yourself to process the stream of images as they come. I'm Ben from Tilting at Tomes. Take care and good reading.